We're quite literally in and recording. This is a very, 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 thrice very exciting day in the good listening to your life and times with me, Chris Grimes, clearing, because I'm delighted to welcome to this wonderful space that I'm going to curate him through, Mr. Chris Pirie from GreenGinger, a wonderful puppeteering company that provides awesome, innovative work for the street, for the stage. And where's the other place you bring it?
We bring it into screen, so film-based animations and work like that. Yeah,
wonderful. And I was lucky enough, sincerely, to work with you 2 or 3 weeks ago. You, out of the blue, got in touch, even though I've known you for years, and we co-ran a session together for Bath University, which was thoroughly enjoyable because I got to meet one of your puppets, BK, and I've even got a film of you doing BK. So I've been really happy to talk to you because, it's such an exciting website that GreenGinger has. It's immediately atmospheric. It's so innovative, and you've had amazing reviews. One of the things I was researching this morning was a Chicago Tribune one, which said, and then there was this singing skeleton who embraced him in bed. Don't ask. Yeah. And then even Lynn Gardner, who's a real seminal reviewer historically, says there's always something wonderfully anarchic about GreenGinger, an inspired mix of art and lunacy.
Yeah, good old Lynn. We miss her. We miss her words appearing in her.
Yes. So I hope you feel I've sincerely blown a lot of smoke at you because you do some lovely stuff.
and I'll blow some mutually back in your direction. But so thank you for inviting me on. This is what a wonderful opportunity to hang out with a mate.
Lovely. And by the way, the puppetry place is another space that you curate. Also, your website was so, I looked this morning, it's so full of generosity for your fellow artists and pointing us to all sorts of support networks during the pandemic. You know, you are grace personified in terms of what you bring, in terms of just trying to keep the art form going. So a sincere thank you on behalf of everyone for that too, because it's just really generous.
Not at all. Well, I mean, it's kind of like a lot. Like my accountant, for example, GreenGinger's accountant has been doing way more than we've ever done, and offering stuff, online seminars to kind of how to navigate this pandemic if you're self-employed, if you have a small business, and basically anything that he's put out there has been like, bring along your mates, let them know this is a free resource. And so I'm constantly, kind of amazed and inspired by other people, and it's what goes around comes around, and causing all of that stuff is.
And as obviously implicitly there's a great generosity of spirit there, and one of my favorite words is reciprocity. What you give out, you'll give back. And so, it's been a joy over the many years we've known each other. We live incredibly close to each other, but we don't bump into each other as often as we might think.
Oh, exactly.
So let's welcome you to the clearing, and it's all to play for. We're going to talk about your clearing, which, by the way, I'm really fascinated to know what it's going to be. You have the most glorious sort of junkyard-esque space in which you curate. So I have no idea whether that will be where you go. That's up to you. But there's a clearing, a tree, some alchemy, some gold, a cheeky bit of Shakespeare, and a cake. So it's all to play for.
Great.
And I mentioned you've been going for 40 years, and I read that you met someone called Terry Lee and your life changed about 40 years ago.
Yes. And I think those things, when someone comes into your life and you and changes your life, and everything that has happened since has very much sprung from that meeting and his generosity. So it does, you kind of, that feeling as I get in the latter stages of my career, or as an established artist, to be aware of the emerging generations, the people that are just graduating from art school or theatre college, whatever it is, and trying to get a grasp in their own working lives and careers, and just to give some stuff back, and to
and again, that's such a generous imperative. And there's an adage I've struck on recently, which is called the diamonds beneath your feet. And the idea of being able to, in the space you're in now, to be able to mentor people coming after you, having been here for 40 years with constant diamonds emerging beneath your feet. So yes. Good on you. So let's get you cracking then. What and where is a clearing for Chris Pirie, GreenGinger, puppeteer, puppet maestro? Where do you go to get clutter-free, inspirational, and able to think?
Clutter-free does not exist, and so I think you touched on it. You preempted this a little bit. But my clearing is probably a junk-filled workbench that I've literally pushed, created an instant clearing just so I can focus on the thing that I've just needed to bring into the clearing, to be able to look at it. So the things get pushed back. The other one that kind of just passed my my thoughts banks this morning was like, I'm a skip diver. I can't, I fail to be able to walk past a skip without at least looking in or getting in. And I think there's that sense of you've dived into a skip, you're standing and just creating a clearing by moving things to the edges, the sides. So
I love that. By the way, it's such a good thing to be a skip diver. I love that.
Yeah, or there are, yeah, it's been an art form that a few of us yeah.
And you described a time when an international puppetry company from thousands of miles away was in Bristol and knocked on your workshop door looking for the most random screw possible, and guess who had one?
And we did, and that was Handspring from South Africa. They created Warhorse that became this global theatrical hit. They happened to be in Bristol working with Tom Morris at the Bristol Old Vic to create Midsummer Night's Dream. And yeah, so they were working in the workshop, the scenic workshop over the way, and needed some, yeah, like you say, some random bit of metal. Have you got a little bracket that kind of looks a bit like this? And I said, come into my,
yes,
I was able, and they were, obviously big massive heroes of mine, and very inspirational for theatre makers everywhere, and to be able to assist them in that way, once they did, I kept my stuff together whilst they were there. As soon as they left, I went to pieces and got a little overexcited. But yeah,
I love that. Wonderful. I'm sure they felt the same too, right back at you. And also you're inspiring engineering students at the moment as well. And I looked at your Twitter feed, and then how do you inspire Key Stage 2 students? Well, what you do, obs, is you create a lab run by rats and build a pig on a bike.
Exactly. Why not? I mean, that's where we're headed right now. And we're hoping to go live with that in the new year or school year in September. It has been postponed many times during the pandemic. We've had to do, and postponed means another 6 months later, another 6 months later. So it's there are windows of opportunity in the school year to do the kind of things we're proposing, but hopefully we'll be able to do that.
And talking about a deep dive into storytelling, which we're about to do deliciously, one of the random times I bumped into you a few years ago, you were saying, I want to do a show in a submarine, and then Intranauts was born. And again, that's become part of your brand proposition. Even the Twitter thing has something to do with the helmet that you're wearing in Intranauts, I think.
Yes. Yeah. So those things happen. Those I mean, submarines has been never been far away from my imagination and my impulse to tell stories that are something about them being locked away, or a pressure valve, or a vessel that is,
and immersion in stories, which is obviously
immersion in stories, something, the peril of the kind of the dark depths, all of that. It kind of plays into those worlds. And
you're a veritable Captain Nemo, Chris Pirie. I'm liking this.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So yes, so in the clearing then, it's lovely. We're either going to do a deep dive into a skip, or we're going into your workshop where we clear the space.
I think a skip, Chris. It's kind of it's. I think once a tree is in there, that for me is a quite an image that I'm excited by.
I thank you for that delicious segue into me now arriving very sort of waiting for Godot-esque flomp with a tree. And I hope, which you already in the skip, obviously diving about, but now I've arrived with the tree, and we're going to shake your tree now. And your second bit of preparation was to think about the exercise 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, where you've had 5 minutes to have thought about, as we know, if you've been listening to the program, if you haven't, where have you been? But it's 4 things that have shaped you, 3 things that have inspired you, 2 things that never fail to squirrels, grab your attention, borrow from the film Up, and then a quirky or unusual fact about you, Chris Pirie, we couldn't possibly know until you tell us. So in your skip, here's your tree, over to you.
Are you good with the numbers? Because if I start going, 17 things that inspired me, it's your job to kind of rein me in, because or kind of going, you only did 2 of those, and we asked for 4, so
Yes, I'll. If we both get lost, that's fine because we're taking a deep dive into a skip. I like that.
Right. Okay, good. So yes, shaped by, like we all are, by our histories, our home life and family life, and I think the things that would have largely shaped my early years would have been just a richness of art materials. I can't remember a time where I couldn't find a piece of paper and a crayon or something to draw, to make marks with. And so that's, yeah, really, really fortunate from that perspective. TV growing up at a time, so I was 5 years old, I think, when color TV was introduced into the just dating myself.
I'm right there.
But I recall, so yeah, there was obviously a lot of puppetry on TV growing up. So Bill and Ben, Pinky and Perky, the Wooden Tops. I guess Magic Roundabout would have been a mainstay. And I do recall seeing Magic Roundabout for the first time in color, having seen it for some years in black and white, and that realization that you make your own colors up. And when you see it in color, you go, Ermintrude isn't pink. What the? It can, you know, like a 5 or 6 year old kid, that seriously threw me.
That's such a throwback, by the way. I love that. There's Zebedee, there's Dougal, there's Florence.
Yeah.
I love all that.
Yeah. But to see it in somebody else's color scheme was really disturbing. I recall being you know, kind of like shunted by that. And then,
by the way, the soundscape of that is whirly-gigging around my head at the moment. I can hear it, right, because yes, thank you for that. I haven't thought about that music for so long.
Not at all. Blue Peter would have been at a massive part. We used to collect milk bottle tops and stamps and send them off. And there would be these, you know, campaigns for, you know, I think it was largely things, poverty programs in Africa that we were helping, and that kind of, you know, white savior kind of complex thing kicking in early. And the sitcoms of the 70s, I guess Porridge and Dad's Army and all of that, those classic British sitcoms would have coloured my world a fair bit. And being allowed to stay up for the opening credits of Monty Python.
Ah, yes, you mentioned this in the car journey we had.
So that being quite a thing, and I think just before I just did give colour to that, Michael Benteen's Potty Time.
Oh gosh, yes.
So Michael Benteen was one of the Goons. The Goons, I guess, laid the groundwork for Monty Python in terms of absurd, Dada-esque comedy on television. And so Michael Benteen's Potty Time was a you know, primetime kids TV show where he would do these amazing landscapes with usually involving sand, so there were deserts
and little cannons,
little cannons and air, you know, people blowing into tubes so that they could have explosions and battlescapes and things. Everything in these miniature worlds, and his ridiculous voices that he would do. And yeah, quite.
Oh, and by the way, you've completely inherited that capability, Michael Benteen-esque, because when you showed me BK during the workshop, you did the most beautiful transformation of here's Chris Pirie, here's his puppet, and then BK came alive with a wonderful voice you just sprung into. It's fantastic.
They're always fun to do those moments when the pressure isn't on and you're not kind of
and the TV set and color TV, I remember, and forgive me if I'm preempting something, but there was the idea of the foot coming through the top of the TV.
Exactly. So the opening credits to Monty Python, created by the great Terry Gilliam, who's you know, films many people will know, but his work, he was the only American amongst the other 5 Englishmen who created Monty Python. And
I know you've got a lovely story, by the way. Sorry, again, I hope I'm not preempting, but I know that the idea of, you know, that notion of meeting your heroes in life.
Yes.
I know that you did meet him and you asked him just out of the blue quite a powerful question.
Yes. Yeah, and you know, do you want to be patron of GreenGinger? And you know, having the cojones, if I'm allowed to say that,
You are.
to chill out in those moments where you meet your, like handspring. I managed to, you know, keep calm even though I was in awe of these puppet makers that had created Warhorse and changed the landscape for puppeteers, brought global attention to our art form. And the same with Terry Gilliam, who happened to come and see one of our shows and chatted afterwards, and, you know, spent half an hour backstage picking up puppets and things. So those kind of moments meant a lot because of that. The seeing right at the close of those opening credits of Monty Python, there's a foot, a drawn foot, which comes down. It's all paper animation, 2D animation, comes down through the top of the TV and just, you know,
Which, coming full circle, by the way, goes right back to your first premise of a bit of paper and a crayon. It goes as simple as that, really.
Exactly.
In your factory default beginning of it all.
And I just remember rushing into the school playground to my mate Mark Clements and saying, "Did you see that last night?" You see, and I don't think he was the first time he was allowed to stay up, but I said, "You're gonna have to ask your parents to let you." You know, we had probably a 9:30 bedtime, and Monty Python would have been on at 10 on BBC Two or something. And so yeah, being allowed to do that, see the credits, and not realizing the impact or the inspiration kind of encapsulated in that short animation. So that I would have been inspired by that very, very much. Then comics. I'd spend half of my pocket money on the Beano as a small child, the other half on sherbet dip dabs.
You're a 70s child like me.
Yeah, you get a jamboree bag, which might have all sorts, you know, might have some Palmer violets, which I hated, and gobstoppers and a few other things. You never knew what you were going to get in a jamboree bag, but so there's if I got 12 old pennies, 6 pennies would go on my Beano and 6 pennies would go on my jamboree bag and possibly a.
By the way, that's taken another throwback in the shot. I'm either going for the Beano or Topper was another magazine out there.
Topper was never really on my radar. I think Dennis the Menace and Nasher and Minnie the Minx and the Bash Street Kids. The Beano was always felt like that was real, like I'd picked the right team to support.
And while we're going for the trilogy, Dandy was the other one, wasn't it?
Yes, Dandy had that, Desperate Dan and all that. But yes, given the choice, Beano was very much the magazine of choice. And being inspired. So they had, I think there was a transfer in the transfer market. When the window was open, they managed to entice the Numbskulls to join. And the Numbskulls were great, were an inspiration from later on for the Intronauts show that you mentioned, where we miniaturize somebody and send them into the human body in a small submarine. So that
you do, perfect.
Numbskulls were all about somebody living in someone's head. So people in the ears department and the nose department and the
gear
eyes
sticks to get people to walk.
And inside a guy called Ed, inside the head of Ed, and it was a lovely simple comic strip which would have a later inspiration. And graduating from Beano towards Mad magazine, I guess in my early teens, and then discovering the artwork of Mort Drucker, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago. He would do these amazing, take Hollywood films and do a spoof of them in over kind of 4 or 5 pages of beautifully drawn caricatures, and I just lapped that stuff up.
Such a delicious throwback, all of this. Thank you so much. Great.
Great. So there'll be the kind of under 30-year-olds going, what are they talking? It's just old men.
A couple of old duffers reminiscing about the 60s and the 70s.
Exactly, yeah.
So we're still in your skip with a wonderful canopy. This is delicious. We're coming on to Alchemy and Gold, but you're giving me that in spades already. So keep jiggling away in your canopy. We're still in inspiration, I think. Shaped, sorry. We're in shapage.
17 already. No, it's fine. So yeah, but those would have been the things that shaped me. So we're not on inspirations yet, are we? We're not.
No, well, it doesn't matter if they meld between the two, because often
Yeah.
what shapes us also inspires us. So
Yes.
really lovely.
Yeah.
What's
So
happening?
I think I'm being shaped by that kind of growing up in the Thames Valley, so on the outskirts of London, end of the Metropolitan line, as far as you can go on the tube. That's where I was born and raised, in that kind of leafy Buckinghamshire. So we had the River Thames, which probably, you know, would for mile, you know, cycling for miles and miles and miles as kids, getting on our rally choppers and going off for the day. None of us had watches. We didn't have mobile phones. We had maybe 2p in our pocket in case we needed to ring home from
Yes.
a public call box. No idea what the time was at any time. None of us had, you know, SP factor 30 or 50.
We went feral.
We went feral. We would, you know, get down to our underpants and jump in the Thames and swim, and then, you know, dry off on the cycle home. And we'd do that for, you know, days. And, you know, the summers would be largely that. So that I guess that shaped my world a little bit.
You're giving us sort of complete delicious sunlight of childhood here. This is really warming.
And it was, yeah. I mean, was it that idyllic? I don't know. Those are the kind of things that I guess I can very much.
It's got a very multi-textured lens of optimism and energy, and a pull towards all things animation. You know, things moved, you wanted to know about it.
Yeah, and there were things that, you know, we got up to all sorts of shenanigans. I had 3 older sisters who were always better at climbing trees than I was, and I would be going, wait for me, how did you get there? And very frustrated by that, but and impelled to you know, try harder or practice in my spare time how to climb trees. We would also get into trouble, and there was kind of there was a different, I guess, in the 60s and 70s, there was a different take on stranger danger, and as parents being left alone to kind of expected that we'd be safe if there was a bonfire in the garden that was left unattended by my parents. And isn't there some paraffin and petrol in that shed over there? I wonder what happens if we and things like that, kind of turning into to me bursting into flames as a small child, and being rugby tackled by my sister, who in brownies the week before had just learnt how to extinguish somebody who is on fire.
Go sister, I love that.
Saved my life. You know,
do you know what's so lovely about sisters? There was a previous guest here called William Goodchild, who you may know, a musician, whose sister, as a child, shot him in the center of the forehead with a Maasai arrow.
Brilliant.
Just awesome.
Yeah. So those things shape you. My son was shaped by being shot in the stomach with a makeshift homemade bow and arrow. And ended up on being featured on 999. I don't even remember. They reconstructed it was a BBC kind of 9 o'clock at night, and they would reconstruct a thing and a medical emergency, and they featured.
I love that they missed your fire, but they went for your son's arrow in the gut. Damn, if we'd only been there for the fire, we could have done the whole family. So here we are, still in the skit. This is just awesome. Where would you like to go next? Because it's just lovely.
I guess in things that I've been inspired by.
Yes.
It feels like is that a good segue to go into that?
Let's do this.
Right. I think the things that popped into my mind this morning when I had your prompts were I'm inspired by my kids. I'm inspired by things that have surprisingly and not just my kids, but their generation. I think the how articulate the generation that is the current generation of teenagers and young adults, and by the Greta Thunbergs and the ability to be so much more articulate about youth protest and we never had that or I didn't get a sense that I was that articulate as a young becoming politically aware in my teens and not not being able to be to explain myself and where I was coming from, what I actually believed in. My kids and their contemporaries seem to have an ease with that. There is now a lexicon around around the things that they're passionate about confronting, around there is a language around sexual orientation and gender expression and neurodiversity, and they have an ease around talking about those things and explaining that, oh well, this is so and so, they are, you know, non-binary, they have, you know, whatever it might be, as they talking about or introducing their friends to us, and you know, it's always a bit of a struggle for me to kind of remember people's pronouns if they change and it's not the ones that you're used to using, and trying to make that habitual. I find that.
But as you say, there is a fluency around just being accepting and inclusivity, a relaxation around that, which is really refreshing. You're quite right.
And there also there is fluidity and fluency around digital expression because they are digital natives. The internet existed before they were born, so they don't have that recollection of, you know, you and I will remember what it's like, you know, just imagine if you had a phone in your pocket, and the phone in our pocket would be a massive kind of phone, rotary dial phone that you would probably wear with a strap across your waist. But imagine being able to and by the way, I used to remember in those sort of slightly clunkier days of going out all day and then dashing back home in order to see the light on the answer machine blinking or not from your agent. And often the light would blink if there was a message, but often it was constant. That's it.
Awkward.
So watching Star Trek and the early Star Trek, and they would have, you know, what this thing, and there's no wires. It's amazing. Mind blown by those moments, and imagining what a future with that must be like. And now we're there. We have that. We bemoan it because we have no control over it, and we don't. You know, trying to have device-free time in any busy family household is a challenge for a lot of parents.
And there is that comedy. If you need to call an emergency family meeting, all you need to do is just flick the Wi-Fi off, and everyone comes into the kitchen.
Yeah.
What's going on?
What's going on? All of that happening. So yes, just being constantly amazed by the ease with which they can make short films for TikTok, or you know, upload things, tell me how to fix my, you know.
Yes, my children are constantly saying old people shouldn't have devices. They're berating me from wherever they're calling me an old person. I think, how dare you?
So I think so that generation that is, you know, has that prowess, that ease.
So that's a lovely inspirational source. The Ute of today. Love that.
Yeah, very good. More related to my work, I guess, the being inspired, and I know this is something that you and I share, but because I listened to your wonderful podcast with Phelan McDermott from Improbable Theatre, and we both were experienced and were moved by a show they made in the late 90s, Shock-Headed Peter.
Yes.
Which was it's become a seminal work, become a work that has been, you know, oft what's the word I'm looking for? It's been mentioned many times as
lauded as being a classic. Yes,
lauded as being a classic and a seminal piece of theatre. So I guess that absolutely kind of sits up there. That perfect merge of physical theatre, live music. You have the tiger lilies on stage. I mean, just the tiger lilies alone would be a thing.
A big magnifying glass for the moon. Someone's face just so extraordinarily.
And one of the best beginnings in any, you know, show anyway, with Julian Bleach walking on stage and saying, so I can't remember the words, but he would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, this will be the best show you've ever." I'm sorry, I'll do that again. I'm walking off stage, and just glorious, and puppetry, physical comedy, theatre, this kind of Victorian pop-up world, just on every level, just so beautifully conceived. And I love that thing that Phelan talks about. He talks about a couple of things that have coloured his work, Humble Materials and Dream Doors, or Leaving the Gap, and the gap being something, portals for the audience's imagination to be able to go into, and that might be a bit of set that is left unpainted, or a physical hole in the set,
yes,
or a button left off a costume. It can be quite small and unnoticed, but they're there. The creators,
yes.
they know that they're there, that they've left these gaps and spaces for the audience to, so everything's not kind of tidied up and suffocatingly complete. I went to see Cameron McIntosh's what's the Bedknobs and, not Bedknobs and Broomsticks, it's, Mary Poppins.
Oh yes,
They did that at the Hippodrome in Bristol before it went to the West End.
Yeah,
it was an £8 million production, I think, and it was, everything was in its place, everything was complete and kind of brilliant, and to the point that, you know, you saw 14 chimney sweeps walking horizontally up the side of a building, and without seeing the cables and the wires, and the machinery was, it was just, everything was kind of
perfect.
And I found myself totally meh. I just couldn't engage with it, because there were no portals, there were no dream doors left for us. They created everything, they created every illusion and completed it.
They solved it all for you. Yes, absolutely. What a great observation. Absolutely.
So the flip side of that would be a production like Shockheaded Peter that had the wisdom to leave the spaces, leave those gaps. And so Phelim's Dream Doors for me is inspirational, and
I mean, it was a gift of itself, because actually you were kind enough to say you've listened to that episode, but we stumble onto using a dream door to segue between two episodes because we're just overrunning.
Yes,
so it is. It's a really profound thing. Mind the gap between where all the magic can happen.
Exactly, and that's what we do in theatre. We kind of create something that meets the audience's imagination, meeting the storyteller or the theatre maker's imagination. Where does that space exist? In cinema, there is a different contract. People sit back and go, okay, entertain me.
Yes.
But in theatre, there's, entertain me and I will meet you. So there's that magical place where those two things
again, very relatable, because in the world of obviously short form comedy improvisation, which I do through Instant Wit, I'm often thinking of the old days of cartoonscapes, when a cartoonist's brush comes in and just quickly colours it in for you, and that's what the audience imagination does. You don't need excellent propery necessarily, you just need to come in and make an assumption, and they'll fill in the colours for you.
Yes, no, exactly. And it kind of just off the top of my head, just thinking about those, you're talking about painting, colouring in, and earlier kind of having my life as an artist, a creative, being inspired by TV artists, of which there were, the two that spring to mind would be Rolf Harris.
Yes.
Who, obviously is less celebrated now
shall we say, yes.
Shall we say, because in the 70s you could get away with that stuff. Nowadays, you can't, and rightly so. And Tony Hart was the one who did a wonderful
Vision On. That's it.
Vision On was an incredible program that kind of just allowed people to, invited the kids across the nation to send in their artwork, and it might appear in the gallery. And
doom ba doom ba doom ba doom dee doo.
Great soundtrack, bit of music, kind of like, I constantly sent things off to them, and I'd write letters to Blue Peter, and all of that stuff, to engaging with TV in a very different way. I don't think.
Did you ever have anything on Vision On?
I never got anything on Vision On.
Like a picture of you on fire or anything?
It didn't stop me trying. But that, and through that, yes, we had Morph was introduced to us through
Aardman,
through that kind of Aardman connection. Now I'm happy to say we're next door neighbours with Aardman. We have a nice working relationship with them.
Yeah.
They come to us if they need some live puppetry. We go to them if we need something, you know, studio space for something else. And so there's a really nice synergy there, and I'm very grateful for that. But they're absolutely inspired by the world of stop motion animation, which with what that shares with live puppetry, what we do, it's just we both sets of artists can take their audiences anywhere we want. We're not restricted by things that mortal actors that are governed by the rules of gravity, time and space. We can transcend all of that.
By the way, your GreenGinger website, which I definitely encourage people to look at beyond listening to this program, is so atmospheric and nails completely what you're describing.
Thank
a
you.
Lovely Imaginarium sort of space.
Great, thank you.
It is my job to make sure that we get the time licking on. This is such rich stuff. There's no hurry, but now I want to hear about two things that never fail to squirrels grab your attention.
It's got to be skips, obviously. And that's something that I am trying to, I've tried, there was a 20 years ago, or maybe a little less than that, 16, 18 years ago, I took over a large warehouse space down in the docks and had it largely to myself to create. I thought it was a great space to create a theatre show and to be able to store it. So so not only build the show, it was going to be big enough to rehearse. So it was about 12 meters by 12 meters, no windows, blackout space. Used to be a prop maker's cod steaks. Before that, it was an animation studio. Before that, it was part of the shipbuilding, the Hills Yard and the Hill House Yard back in Albion Docks. So it's got this rich history. It was the shipwrights' chapel and Sunday school back in the day. 200 years ago, that it had a life as that, and now it is home to GreenGinger, and it's known as Puppet Place. So it's 17 micro businesses, so animators and puppet makers and designers and other artists share the resources and the space and the tools in there. But when I had it to myself before, I invited more and more people in to share it, and you were one of the people that came in at times to use the space for making some episodes of a film project you had on at the time. But being a skip diver meant that I had space to fill, and so it really became a serious junkie habit. I couldn't walk past the skip without going, oh, that might be useful one day, and load up a cart or my car or whatever vehicle they had, or my pockets, and put them, because that might be useful one day. Meant that I had stuff to make shows from. I had these raw materials that had already had a life, and I was repurposing and renewing.
Oh, there was a delicious comedy story about how it's a magnet to other artists within the city, because someone else I've already interviewed, Peter Maurice, who was in a production of Pinocchio, knocked on your studio door because she was desperate for a wee during the pandemic, knowing that there was an effigy of her head as Pinocchio in the studio. So her way of talking her way into the loos was to say, that's my head, could I please do a wee?
And I created that head for her. So to invent the growing nose of Pinocchio, that we worked with the great Peter Clifford. I don't know.
Yes.
Another mutual acquaintance.
And he's a poker buddy of yours, isn't he, Peter Clifford?
Playing with him last night. But Peter and I created an illusion. We looked at loads of different ways of doing that, because at the time Shrek the musical was actually opening on the West End, that had probably a couple of million thrown at that problem, and they, with animatronics and micro servo motors, they literally had a nose that would grow. Ours was a slightly lower budget show that was going to happen, I think, at the Tobacco Factory Christmas show, and it needed a lower tech version. We ended up just like sneezing into handkerchiefs that had these magnetic sections that would make it so every time, you know, instead of the nose growing, the impulse to lie caused a sneeze. So we secretly, it worked. Peter,
it worked. I saw it. It worked. Fantastic production.
So that was having tried. You know, I've got failed things with pneumatics and all sorts of things that would never keep together, and involved Peter having extra stuff built into a costume, which became too complex.
By the way, just reminded me, I should hunt him down for an episode of this as well, because
you should. He's such a warm, generous, lovely man, and very funny. So yeah, do.
A quirky or unusual fact about you, Chris Pirie, we couldn't possibly know, and you've given us loads of that, like you were on fire, and you are on fire.
I was just about to go on to another inspiration then, but I had that in mind. I'm going to share that with you actually, because it is a little gem, and it's something that I've been inspired by recently, rather than something from my past. And that's I don't know if you know of Ogmios, but Ogmios is a rapper and comedian. And he has created this thing called the Zen School of Motoring. And he's created for the BBC Three market. So there's 6, I think there are 6, but I've only seen 3 of them so far. They're 15-minute films. And it's basically him driving, doing a voiceover as he drives slowly around the streets of London. And he's just talking about it's defensive driving, basically. There's a person, they want to get in, they want to, I'll let them in. I will just let them in, and they'll have a great day, and they'll feel good that I've been. And he's just doing this patter that he's.
Do you know? I think I might have seen the first one, because Jeremy Routledge dropped it into the LOL virus group that I'm curating.
Great.
I know what you mean. I think.
Check them out. Ogmios Zen School of Motoring.
And how do you spell Ogmios?
Ogmios, I think, is Ogmios. Ogmios, but Zen School of Motoring, you'll get there on YouTube or and they're just so warm and lovely, and it just makes you feel like I'm inspired. I love defensive driving. I'm trying to remind myself every time I get jump into a metal crate weighing a ton and be able to go many miles an hour to exercise that kind of level of awareness and just a different way of driving, and letting people in at every opportunity, and maybe that'll happen, and this cause and effect, and you just hope to spread it, I think.
Yes.
So that's
there's a lovely generosity to you, Mr. Chris Pirie, in that you're very generously doing a wonderful scattergun, which is why reciprocity works so well for you, by the way, because I
think because I've had so many opportunities, and the thing, my white male middle class privilege, call it what you will, the opportunities that have befallen me, I wanted to just give some of that back.
If I may, though, it's not like you're just a complete white middle class conformist. You're a real maverick, and that's a real compliment, because you're a very unusual man. That's a pleasure to know, because you're not just following one path. It's not linear. You're rummaging around in skips.
I do. Yeah, I have a ping pong mentality. So focusing is really hard. The other thing I was distracted by, because you asked for 2, was flea markets, which I bemoan the kind of, not the total demise, but the change of, with the internet, we now have eBay, and everybody knows the value of everything nowadays. Whereas flea markets 20 years ago was a very different thing, and with the chance of finding bargains and real kind of things that people would discard but somebody else would find. Now everyone knows the value of an old ukulele. Everyone knows the value of a bunch of old coins or tools or whatever it is that you might from a rummage around. So I do miss that deeply. But
by the way, could I ask you a small favour? I've got an instinct that we need to keep going, but I'd quite like to make this into 2 episodes, if you don't mind. Do you have time for us to keep riffing?
I do have some time, but not. I'll.
So I'll tell you what. Let's get. If you'll allow me, let me get a bit of a lick on. But we'll agree to have you back.
Great.
Because I'm feeling that this is such a lovely skipscape, that there's more to be. There's lots of rummaging to be had.
You can rummage in my skip, Chris.
Bless you. So if you don't mind, I'll just get a slight sort of artificial lick on just to get you to the end of this episode. I've got a couple of minutes now,
and then we can dive in again.
Yes. So we'll come back to Chris Pirie from GreenGinger's skip, I promise. Just quickly then, just tell us about your URLs and where we can find out more about you as we segue into what will eventually become episode 2.
So mostly at www.greenginger.net. I do have personal Instagram account, which is probably not that interesting, but that certainly GreenGinger will give you further routes into digging around into my murky past and why I do what I do and how I do it.
And what's the Twitter handle as well?
Twitter would just be GreenGinger Theatre, I believe. Oh no, or maybe at GreenGinger. I think you would get there. Maybe Instagram. I should know all this stuff.
No pish and tosh, and in fact, we'll cut and paste your URLs in anyway. That's no problem.
Thank you.
So yet to come. We've got the end of the, you've got a quirky or unusual fact. We've also got alchemy and gold, and then we're going to have a bit of Shakespeare. There's more to play for, but I think this brings us roundly to the end, and we'll use a sort of, what construct shall we use? We're in a skip. We've talked about dream doors and mind the gap. Pluck something out of the skip that we'll use as our segue into part 1 and 2.
Oh, a broken microwave. It's just grabbed my attention. I couldn't tell you why, but it might be useful one day.
And Terry Gilliam's foot may come steaming through the top of the microwave.
I probably will, but yes.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I promise you this is just part 1 of 2. There is more to come from the lovely Chris Pirie from GreenGinger. Can I just say what an absolute delight and a joy it was speaking to you thus far. Sorry to press you, but are you okay to come back a second time?
Yes, I am indeed. It would be a huge pleasure to do that, Chris.
Because your life's lessons learned along the way are delicious indeed. And as I say, I'm really looking forward to Alchemy and Gold as well. So this has been your Life and Times with me, Chris Grimes, the good listening to, here in the clearing with Chris Pirie from GreenGinger. This has been the show version of it on UK Health Radio. As you know, we also pull it into the good listening to podcast space as well, which is hosted on Buzzsprout. So here on UK Health Radio, until next week, come back to the clearing. Chris Pirie may or may not be there for the next episode, but he's coming back. And so until next time, to your good health and goodbye. Anything else you'd like to say by way of ta-ta?
No, just thank you very much for having me on. It's great and lovely to hang out with your listeners.
Tatty, bye, you lovely man. Bye.